Hello, and welcome to episode number 45 of Wrestlerotica, the podcast that combines wrestling and erotica. This week we have 3 stories to share with you. The first story is entitled 4-Letter Words. In this story, AJ Styles is sharing an encounter with the Raven, who forces him to be open about what he wants. The second story is entitled Our Champion. In this story, the Motor City Machine Guns aren't satisfied with the current path that AJ Styles has taken. They decide that they are going to persuade the champion in their own unique way. The third and final story is entitled Simply Phenomenal. In this story, after successfully making his debut on WWE RAW and achieving a victory over Krys Jericho, AJ Styles can't stop thinking about him. Luckily for him, Chris Jericho also seems to have the same problem. Without further ado, let's get to this week's stories. This story is entitled 4-Letter Words, and it was written by fanfiction.net user JadeAndKate. Say it, AJ! Blue eyes snapped open in confusion. Say what? Anything. Tell me what you want.
So tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I really wanna zig a zig, ah.
AJ Styles fought back a shudder as rough facial hair scratched across his neck, followed by soft kisses tracing the line of his collarbone. Well, he hedged, then swallowed hard. That feels pretty good. Really? Raven asked dryly, pulling away from AJ and sitting back on his heels. So that's all you want to do tonight? AJ shrugged, uncomfortable under the suddenly direct gaze. We could do other stuff. Like what? AJ scowled. You know, quit being annoying. Raven's smirk barely registered on his face before disappearing. I have no idea what you're talking about. You're going to have to say it. AJ decided to go on the offensive, pouncing on Raven rather than answering. A few minutes and a quick roll later, Raven had AJ pinned under him on the hotel mattress. You were saying? Raven prompted calmly. AJ grumbled under his breath before plastering on his best suggestive smile and looking up at Raven. I could just show you. I'm sure you could. Raven agreed, his voice catching slightly as AJ's thigh slid upwards, pressing against the bulge in his jean shorts. But I'd rather hear you say it. AJ let his leg drop and heaved a sigh in exasperation. How come? He demanded petulantly. It sounds dumb. Raven chuckled, lowering his head so that his breath brushed the side of AJ's neck. I promise you, it will not sound dumb, he whispered. Yes, it will, AJ insisted. You just think it won't because you're a dirty old man. Raven laughed out loud, so hard that AJ couldn't help grinning himself. Well, you are, he insisted. Unquestionably. And since it is customary to humor those who fuck, Raven broke off as the hill of AJ's hand pressed firmly into his denim-covered erection. Told you, you'd get the idea. AJ smirked, using his free hand to work open the fly of Raven's shorts. Conversation stalled as AJ wiggled out of his own clothes, moaning softly in anticipation as Raven's hands followed his movements, sliding over each newly exposed area of AJ's body. AJ pressed upwards, but Raven firmly pushed his hips back to the bed. Not until you say it, he reiterated stubbornly. AJ bit back, a frustrated shout. Why are you so set on this? Because you're so set against it. Raven answered simply. Because I want to be the reason you lose control. Why are you being such a bitch about this? I'm not being a... AJ caught himself before the profanity slipped out. You're a butthole.
Whoa, she just said butthole.
Raven blinked at him. Butthole? You seriously just called me a butthole?
Butthole!
AJ clenched his jaw and tried not to fidget, refusing to answer. Wow! Clearly at a loss for words, Raven shifted back onto his knees, dragging his fingers through his hair. Just wow, he repeated. You have issues, AJ. Sliding off the bed, Raven moved towards the tiny kitchenette adjoining the bedroom. I'm not the one with issues, AJ muttered. Raven threw an amused glance over one shoulder as he opened the refrigerator door. I haven't heard the word butthole since 3rd grade. Well, you were probably one then. AJ watched in exasperation as Raven grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, then dropped into an armchair facing the bed. He didn't even bother zipping his jean shorts. What are you doing? Raven took a long swallow of water, carefully placing the bottle cap on the table to his side before answering. Waiting? For what? AJ scooted down the bed so that he could sit on the edge of it, facing Raven. He thought about retrieving his clothes, but decided against it. For you! You want me to come over there? AJ stood hesitantly. Raven's eyes swept down his body, and AJ's confidence grew as he watched Raven struggle to drag his gaze back up. I can do that. AJ crossed the space slowly, giving Raven the opportunity to enjoy the view before leaning down into a heated kiss. Raven hummed his appreciation, his hands sliding over the back of AJ's thighs, as the smaller man spread his legs to straddle Raven's lap. The kiss deepened until AJ finally broke it away, gasping as Raven's hand closed around him, stroking him with maddening slowness. AJ bucked reflexively, but Raven's free hand ripped his hip just firmly enough to prevent the increase in tempo. Raven, please! AJ pleaded, grinding his hips downward. Please what? Raven sighed as AJ hesitated. This isn't a difficult game, AJ. You tell me what you want. The hand around AJ tightened fractionally. And I'll do it. AJ looked skeptical. Like Simon Says? Raven smothered most of his laugh into AJ's shoulder. Like the world's dirtiest game of Simon Says, he promised. AJ nodded thoughtfully. I could maybe handle that. Excellent.
Excellent!
Raven released him, leaning back in his chair and watching AJ expectantly. AJ had to fight not to blush under Raven's direct gaze. As a distraction, he leaned forward to nibble on the most sensitive part of Raven's earlobe. He felt Raven tense slightly under him, but was somewhat surprised that the man remained otherwise still, waiting. AJ murmured against the side of Raven's neck. So you gotta do what I say now, right? This could be kinda fun, he added with a grin. He was amazed at how much easier it felt when Raven wasn't looking at him. I don't have to do anything, Raven corrected quickly. But if you tell me what you want, I'll try to make it happen. Within reason, of course. Of course. AJ pulled back suddenly to look Raven in the eye. I want you to kiss me. Raven smirked at him before brushing a feather-like kiss across AJ's waiting lip. Jerk! Raven's grin widened. Is that better or worse than being a butthole? Shut up and kiss me like you mean it. See? Raven noted as he obediently leaned forward. You're already getting bossy. AJ's retort was smothered by Raven's mouth. His whole body felt flushed, heated against the comparatively cool fabric of Raven's clothes. Come on, touch me, he demanded in a gasp, pulling back just far enough to shove Raven's t-shirt over his head. Raven lifted his arms to allow AJ to peel off his shirt, but then dropped his hands back to his sides. Touch where? Everywhere? AJ tried hopefully. Raven stared at him, still waiting. Darn it, Raven! AJ exploded in frustration, shifting back farther on Raven's lap so that he could glare more effectively. You know darn well what I want you to do. You're just being a pain in the butt. An eyebrow twitched, but Raven didn't bother responding. You're supposed to be the smart one. AJ continued accusingly. You ought to be able to know how to do this without me telling you. It ain't really that hard. You just stick your thing in my hoo-ha and go at it. AJ folded his arms and tried his best to look defiant through the blush he felt creeping into his face. Raven blinked at him, knocked speechless for the second time that night. He pulled in a quick breath. exhaling with something close to a disbelieving laugh. AJ, I don't know whether to be more appalled at your vocabulary or your grasp of human anatomy, because I believe you just implied that you have a vagina. I did not! AJ exclaimed further. I told you, this sounds stupid. Say fuck, AJ. Raven demanded suddenly, his voice holding no trace of amusement. AJ frowned, twisting his head to one side and staring at the cream-colored hotel room wall. Fuck. He finally spat out tonelessly. It sounded unnatural. AJ decided to try again. Fuck. 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 Fucking fuck. He turned back to Raven, encouraged by the slight grin he found there. He smiled back, then shrugged and relaxed in an impression of the casual banter prevalent in TNA locker room. Fuck this fucking shit, he announced, referencing nothing in particular. Son of a bitch! Oh! He broke off as Raven's tongue slid up the side of his neck to the flesh just under his ear. Nicely done, he purred, his breath hot against AJ's skin. Grabbing AJ's hips with both hands, Raven dragged him forward, pressing their bodies together insistently. Now, do you think you could focus your new vocabulary on the subject at hand? AJ had to struggle to decipher the suggestion through the suddenly overwhelming sensory input from his body. Oh! He repeated, understanding flashing through him as Raven's thumbnail scraped over a rapidly hardening nipple. Fuck me! AJ could feel Raven's smile widen, teeth pressed against the side of his neck. The sensation disappeared as Raven pulled his head back to respond, his voice low and rough. Thought you'd never ask. Checkout's in half an hour. AJ gave up keeping his eyes closed, but still refused to give up his position sprawled haphazardly across the mattress. He blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the morning light as he listened to Raven finish packing his bags and mumble something about being late for a flight. Even the thought of crawling out of bed made his muscles ache. AJ? Raven's voice held a note of concern, so AJ pulled in a deep breath, searching for an accurate summation of his current state. He settled on a sleep-roughened, fuck. Raven laughed. Getting pretty fond of that word, AJ grunted in response, rolling over onto his stomach and letting his eyes slide closed. You're still a butthole, he managed to mutter before sleep took over again. The end. This story is entitled Our Champion, and it was written by fanfiction.net user GrandpasGuitars. He walked out of the elevator quickly. He wanted to get to his room as soon as possible, so he could go to bed. He felt particularly stretched out today. On top of his match and the ridiculous amount of time Ric Flair insisted he take to get ready for his in-ring appearance, which was automatically turned useless once he had to switch to ring attire. He was pulled into a meeting that seemed to go on forever. AJ got to the room and rummaged through his pockets, finally finding his key. Thank God the day's over. He opened the door, loosening the tie he now had to wear, and threw his bag to the side. As he put his jacket and the tie away, he heard, Finally! We thought you'd never get here. AJ froze, recognizing the voice immediately. He walked into the middle of the room, turning his gaze to the bed. Chris Sabin, the person who spoke, lay on the bed, his hands splayed across Alex Shelley's chest. Alex lay right next to him, smirking. But what really surprised AJ was that they were both in their boxers, and way too close to each other. How did you get into my room? AJ asked, glaring at them. All it took was a little charm, and a few lines about wanting to surprise my wife, Alex said, running a hand down Chris's bare leg. It was really quite easy.
That was easy.
Okay. So, why are you in here? Chris laughed, pulling away from Alex and standing up. That's when AJ noticed something else about Chris. His cock was fully erect. AJ unconsciously licked his lips, his eyes trained on Chris's movements. Come on. I took you for way more intelligent. Krys began walking over to AJ, making AJ step back, but it was too late. Krys grabbed his arm, keeping him still. See? Alex and I, we don't like your new posse. Not at all, Alex echoed, watching the scene in front of him with a smile. Krys shook his head, putting a hand on AJ's shoulder. So, we decided to provide you with something a little more substantial.
Oh yeah!
I bet those women are just fawning over your pretty little smile and your Armani suit. Do any of them really think about how to make you happy? Krys's hand slipped off AJ's shoulder and ran down his clothed chest. AJ shuddered, and Krys snickered. I'll take that as a no.
No! No! No!
A pair of hands gripped AJ's lower back, and he wondered when Alex got off of the bed. However, the thought disappeared as soon as Alex's lips touched his ear. What about turning you on? He asked. Or is that a no too? Teeth caught AJ's ear roughly, making his eyes widen. There was no doubt in his mind anymore about where their minds were. AJ wondered if there was any way out of the position he was in. Alex behind him and Krys in front of him, but the determined look on Krys's face told him he wasn't moving. And he could bet that Alex had the same look. We're here because we want to take care of our champion, Krys said, grabbing the top button of AJ's shirt. He pulled it out slowly, staring into AJ's eyes as he went from the first one to the next. Is that a problem? Krys pushed his lips into AJ's, breaking him off mid-sentence. AJ was practically immobile, Alex's lips moving down to his neck, while Krys continued unbuttoning the shirt. A sudden chill went down AJ's spine as Alex pushed the shirt down, revealing the skin and biting the curve between AJ's neck and his shoulder. He yelped, allowing Krys to push his tongue into his mouth. Krys moved away, drinking in AJ's overwhelmed expression, before he pulled AJ's shirt completely off. Two pairs of eyes raked down AJ's now bared torso like they'd never seen it before, with twin expressions of hunger.
Feed me more!
So sweet, Krys said. Then he grabbed AJ's arm again and began pulling him to the bed. It didn't take long before Alex started helping, pushing him from behind. Guys, I'm not sure. Before he could finish, Alex twirled him around, pushing him onto the bed. The impact stopping him mid-sentence. Not sure about what? Alex asked, kneeling on the bed in front of him. AJ blushed. He couldn't help but feel a little excited, looking at Alex on his knees in front of him. Images flicked through his mind, each more illicit than the last, and he couldn't help but admit that he enjoyed each and every one. As Alex pulled off both of his shoes, he tried to articulate his point. But his mind kept jumping to the idea of what Alex would do down there, with his hands, with his lips. Gotta speak up, Allie. Krys sat next to him on the bed, never moving his gaze from the champion. Alex and I won't know what you want if you don't speak to us. Krys bent over and pressed his lips to AJ's pulse before saying, What do you want? The whole situation seemed like a crazy dream. The way Krys's breath hit his neck erotically did nothing to break him from the trance Alex put on him. AJ tried to speak again, but then he felt Krys's hand on the front of his pants. He gulped as Krys began undoing his belt, still tasting the skin beneath him. As soon as Krys was done, Alex pulled his pants away from him, leaving him as exposed as both the younger men. Alex rubbed his hands down his now bare legs, and AJ took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. Krys! AJ said, his voice obviously weakening. Yes? Krys, Oh! AJ stuttered out, feeling Alex's teeth grazing his upper thigh. The very sound went straight to Krys's groin, making him twitch with desire. For too long, he and Alex wondered what it would be like to have AJ in between them. But the real thing was better than anything either of them imagined. AJ bit his bottom lip, trying to hold back his moan as Alex went higher and higher on his leg. and Chris's lips went lower and lower down his chest. His eyes screwed shut, his body trembling uncontrollably. "Allie!" Krys whispered, noticing immediately. "Allie! Open your eyes. We want to see you," Alex added. "We want to see your eyes. Come on, open them." AJ opened his eyes, making the tag team partners even more excited for what was to come. "Just relax, Allie. We'll take care of you." Chris's hand slipped under the waistband of AJ's boxers and began rubbing his thigh, delighting in the expressions that fell on his face. Alex grabbed the bottom of AJ's boxers and inched them down. "Wait! Stop!
Stop it!
AJ finally managed to spit the words out, his voice uneven and needy. Alex and Krys both paused, moving away from what they were doing, and AJ's body immediately yearned for the attention to return. "What is it?" Alex asked. AJ looked from him to Krys, who was wondering the same thing. In that moment, AJ realized that they were giving him a chance, a way out. If he really didn't want it, they would back off. "Don't stop!" The machine guns grinned simultaneously. AJ was all theirs. Krys leaned forward and pressed his lips into AJ's. AJ immediately opened up for Krys, letting Krys keep control of the moment. "Our sweet Allie!" Alex slid AJ's boxers down the rest of the way before climbing onto the bed, on the other side of AJ's body. "So beautiful!" Following Krys's lead, Alex bent down and kissed AJ passionately. AJ put his hands on Alex's cheeks, pushing him closer, just enjoying the intimate contact. "Wait!" A voice broke through the moment, causing AJ and Alex to break apart. "Not yet, Lex!" Krys walked away, disappearing towards the door. The disappointment was clear on Alex's face. He didn't like being told to stop, especially when things were getting good. "I don't want to wait!" Alex pinched AJ's nipples, rolling it between his fingers to prove his point. "I want to have him now!" "Well, wait. What if I decide to cross the line?"
They say you crossed the line.
Like that's a bad thing.
Like it's a bad thing.
Like you've gone too far.
"And play with AJ without you." "You wouldn't dare, Lex. Besides, you know my ideas are usually for the best." Krys returned, carrying with him AJ's heavyweight belt. AJ sat up, watching curiously as Krys came back to them. "We'll need this soon, champ," Krys said. He sat it next to the bed on the nightstand, before turning back to AJ. "Our champion!"
The champ is here!
Krys purred, making AJ blush. He liked the sound of that. Their champion. It just had a perfect ring to it. He wanted to hear them call him that all the time. Krys was on his knees within seconds, pushing AJ's legs apart, and sitting in the middle of them. There was no time to think, no time to prepare himself. All he could do was let a loud moan erupt from his throat as he felt the first swipe of Krys's tongue against his cock. Part of him felt embarrassed for being so audibly turned on, but the other half didn't care. He wanted nothing more than to lean forward, force Krys to take it further. Alex's hands seemed everywhere at once, working AJ into more of a frenzy as Krys tongue-teased and circled mercilessly. AJ squirmed against them, craving more, but the younger brunette seemed determined to drive him insane. "Please!" AJ groaned. "Please! I need..." Krys's hands pushed down on AJ's thighs, holding him steady as he pulled a good portion of AJ's length into his mouth. In that exact moment, Alex took AJ's nipple in his mouth, his fingers playing with the other one. All AJ could do was grip the sheets in sheer passion, his mind incredibly numb under the combined assault.
The assault is next.
"Oh God! Please!" AJ breathed. Any illusion of control was gone. He was subject to the two men touching him, and AJ wouldn't have it any other way. Their mouths were like heaven. Alex bit down before pressing his tongue down on the nipple, the sensitive skin becoming more excited. Krys, meanwhile, swallowed around him, knowing exactly when to hum lowly around him, making the moment last longer. Chris's mouth suddenly slipped off of his member, and AJ found himself lying on the bed again. Alex rubbed AJ's thigh soothingly, while Krys climbed back up into the bed. "Do you have any idea what you do to us?" Alex asked, but AJ could hardly hear it. He was too focused on the mind-numbing ache in between his legs. Alex's hand wrapped around his cock and he began pumping him, using Chris's saliva and AJ's own pre-cum to stick to the motions. As AJ pushed against Alex's hand, Krys offered AJ his fingers. Almost on instinct, AJ took them into his mouth, lavishing them with his tongue to the best of his ability. If there was one thing about Alex and Krys people needed to know, it was their ability to tell what the other man was thinking, and their complete knowledge of how to supplement it. Alex widened AJ's legs further, and Krys pulled his fingers away from AJ's mouth, and working around Alex's hand, he prodded against AJ's tight passage. Once the first finger slipped in and began probing around, AJ's head rolled back. All he could do was cry out in bliss, his mind awhirl with pleasure and desire. He felt himself tightening as Krys added a second finger. His digits prodded against his sweet spot, and AJ let out one last cry, spilling into Alex's hand. Krys kept pushing his fingers into him, letting AJ ride out his climax before stopping the motions. AJ's chest rose and fell with his breathing, his hair matted down with sweat, as he tried to relax. He wasn't sure how much time passed as he lay there. He wasn't even aware of Alex leaving the room, or of Chris's hand against his hair, rubbing his head soothingly. When Alex came back, he cleaned off AJ's legs, belly, and cock with a washcloth, kissing the now glistening skin once he was done. "Sit up, Allie." AJ did as Krys told him, and suddenly, Krys clipped his title belt around his waist. Alex whistled lowly, and Krys licked his lips. AJ looked positively irresistible, the gold glistening against his bare skin. "Now, that's a pretty picture," Krys said lustfully. AJ smiled, and then he looked from Alex to Krys. They were both still erect. His face fell, wondering why he didn't think to do anything for them. "Look, shouldn't I?" Alex shook his head, understanding where he was going. "You've already done enough, champ. I've never been so turned on in my life." He smirked at Krys, who returned the expression. "Don't worry about it. Krys and I can take care of ourselves." "So," Krys interrupted, pulling Alex off the bed and into his arms. "Do you want to watch, champ? Or was that a stupid question?" A smile graced AJ's face, and that told Krys all he needed to know. "Well, Alex, we might want to step our game up. We have an audience." The end. This story is entitled Simply Phenomenal, and it was written by Krys Jericho. What a night! What a debut! AJ Styles could barely keep the grin off of his face as he made his way backstage after a more than impressive first night on Monday Night Raw, debuting with a victory over the legendary Krys Jericho.
I am the Ayatollah of rock and roller.
In a match that was simply, well, phenomenal, to say the very least. It wasn't often that AJ was satisfied with his own matches, but he had to say that this match against Jericho had been one of his all-time favorites. Jericho had lived up to his promise of looking out for him, and it paid off in a huge way. The fans loved it. Ate up every single move the two of them dished out against one another, and AJ couldn't have been happier. He remembered selling through the air towards Jericho, and how Jericho had rolled out of the way, leaving him to flop on the mat, knocking the air out of his body. How Jericho had tried to capitalize on a weakened AJ during the match and tried to hit a lionsault, only to have AJ kick his knees up and block the attack at the last moment. Most of all, he remembered rolling Jericho up, reversing Jericho's roll-up, and holding him against him as he scored the 3 count to pick up his first victory in the WWE.
You cannot underscore enough how huge this victory is for AJ Styles, his first night on Raw.
The memory of it brought another grin to his face. But what made that grin linger a moment longer was the feel of Jericho pressing against him, struggling against his lower body as he tried to wiggle out of AJ's pin. The thought of Jericho's silky, creamy skin caused AJ's skin to tingle, and another smile to cross the younger man's face. The memory of Jericho's cockiness earlier in the night, clapping him on the back and calling him kid, only to flush in anger and embarrassment as AJ not only pinned, but humiliated him in the middle of the ring in his very first match, caused AJ nothing short of pleasure that shot straight to his groin. Feeling his cock beginning to stir to life from all of the images flashing through his mind of both himself and the older man, all over one another mere moments earlier, AJ flushed crimson and hurried on his way to the men's locker room, intent on getting into a dark corner of the shower and stroking himself to climax and peace. He rushed through the throngs of people waiting for him after he reached the backstage area, smiling and nodding his thanks as people clapped hands on his back and congratulated him on a well-done debut, citing that he wanted to get a quick shower so he could enjoy the rest of the show as a fan and get a further feel for the company. He closed the door behind him to the men's locker room with a sigh, grateful that the room was nearly empty, with the exception of a few stragglers, gathered around the TV and watching the next segment that followed his match. The entire way, images assailed his mind of the blonde Canadian. Those golden locks, the sapphire blue eyes, narrowed in concentration and focus as he worked to get the better of the phenomenal one. Those thick, luscious legs of Jericho as they strutted towards him. The feel of his hands on him, punching at him, fisting in his hair. Oh God! At this rate, he was going to come before he even touched himself. As soon as he stripped down and climbed into the shower, his cock was already leaking. Nearly painful to the touch, he was so hard. He ran a hand lightly up and down its rigid length once, and had to bite back a moan at his own touch. The hot water rained down on his golden body as he closed his eyes and allowed his mind to revisit that match, recall each and every point of contact Jericho's hands had touched his body. A light moan escaped his lips as he ran his hands over his body, retracing every single place Jericho had touched him. Pure heaven. Jericho entered the locker room with a smile on his face. Yet another match that had gone exactly the way he'd wanted it to. Yes, he'd lost his match, but he had made AJ, the new guy, look good in his debut. And in that mission, he had succeeded. To his surprise and extreme pleasure, he had even exceeded his own expectations, which made him the happiest of all. He clapped a hand on Heath Slater's shoulder as he and the rest of the social outcasts greeted him on their way out the door for their upcoming segment, leaving the locker room empty, and sat down in one of the chairs, exhaling with a contented sigh. It had been a good match, he had to admit. He had always wanted to work with AJ, and the kid was good. There had been no question about that. Unfortunately for Jericho, while he knew that he was going to lose to the younger man, there was always a small, arrogant, cocky part of him that refused to go down without a fight. And that was what had made the match all the more bittersweet, because his pride had been at odds with his head, and his lower anatomy had been at odds with both parties, because his lower anatomy had wanted to pin AJ down and drive him into his tight little ass in front of the entire world. Still sitting in the chair, Krys reached his hand out and lightly rubbed himself through his wrestling trunks. Groaning quietly at the sensation, he then glanced around to make sure that the locker room was still empty, stood up and walked over to the door and locked it, before making his way over to his gear bag and grabbing out both a bottle of lube and a change of fresh clothes. He couldn't wait to get back to the hotel room. If he didn't get himself off right now, he was going to go crazy. It was just then, as he was zipping the bag back up, that he heard what sounded like a strangled moan that came from the showers. Catching his attention, Jericho walked over to the showers and saw what could have been the most arousing sight ever right in front of him. There was AJ Styles in all his naked glory. One hand braced against the wall in front of him, hot water cascading all down his body, his head thrown back in ecstasy as he stroked his cock slowly. His lips were parted ever so slightly, ripe and pink, as he moaned and sped up his rhythm slightly. "Krys!" The younger man whimpered, a gusty sigh as he continued to stroke himself, and Jericho found himself both stunned and unable to look away. It was not only an extremely arousing sight, but the mere glimpse of the younger man stroking himself to climax, calling Krys's name as he did, was more than the Canadian could bear. And before he knew what was happening, Krys strode into the shower towards the younger man, intent on being the one taking AJ over the edge. AJ's eyes snapped open in surprise when he heard footsteps padding across the floor of the shower. He nearly jumped out of his skin when he felt another body pressing against him, and a hand reaching around to wrap slim fingers around his cock to stroke him. "What the?" he began, but a soft, silky voice shushed him before he could utter another word. "Shh! Don't say a word," he commanded silkily, running his hand up and down AJ's silky cock. "You don't have to say anything." AJ sucked in a breath as Jericho's hands, one running a hand through his hair, the other still working his cock, drove him insane. Slowly, the one running through his locks was withdrawn, and slowly guiding him around so that his back was against the wall. With that cocky smirk on his face, as if he had just discovered a rare treasure he had known would become his all along, Krys Jericho slowly dropped down to one knee in front of AJ's cock, and slowly, teasingly, ran his tongue up the underside of his shaft. AJ threw back his head against the wall, moaning loudly at the sensation of the Canadian's mouth on him, driving him closer and closer to the edge of sanity. Just the feel of Jericho's mouth on him was ecstasy, pure and simple. The feel of that velvety tongue on his cock, running up and down his shaft, moaning as he did so. Even running his tongue along his testicles. It was too much to bear, and soon AJ was thrusting uncontrollably into his mouth, unable to control himself. Through it all, Jericho kept a firm hold of the younger man, one hand on his thigh, the other hand stroking himself in time to AJ's erratic thrust. Finally, AJ could take no more, and with the hitch of his breath and a loud curse, thrust one final time, exploding and shooting stream after thick stream of his hot seed down Jericho's throat. "Fuck, yes!" he groaned, holding the blonde's head in place as he went rigid, jerking as each wave of orgasm hit him. "Oh my god!" he breathed as he slowly withdrew from Jericho's mouth, collapsing wearily against the wall of the shower, eyes closed in blissful satiation as he slowly came down from the high. When he opened his eyes again a moment later, Jericho was already on his way out of the showers, that delicious ass of his swaying from side to side as he strutted away. "Wait!" AJ cried, rushing to catch up with him, but unable to do so because of his now seemingly boneless legs from his powerful orgasm moments before. When he turned off the shower head and made his way out of the shower area, Jericho was already mostly dried off and pulling on his jeans. AJ came to a stop in front of him, still panting from the intense orgasm and dripping from head to toe. "Why? Why did you do that?" he asked breathlessly. Instead of answering, Jericho just gave him a smirk. "Do I really need a reason for doing anything that I do?"
Yes! Yes!
he inquired, raising one golden eyebrow in amusement. When AJ stared at him in confusion, he leaned in and stole a kiss from the younger man. Before he could form a coherent thought, let's just say that I've had you on my radar for a long time. And now that you're in the WWE, where I want you, I think it's a pretty fair bet that we'll be seeing each other like this on a consistent basis. Starting tonight in my hotel room. With that said, seeing AJ's speechless look, Jericho smirked again and patted his cheek. See ya around, Junior. Zipping his pants to emphasize his point, Jericho finished dressing and unlocked the locker room door, throwing it open casually and exiting. As the door closed behind the Canadian, AJ continued to stare on in confusion. Was it really what he had wanted? The entire encounter? Or something that Jericho, in typical Jericho fashion, had cooked up in an attempt to get his way? He was unable to find an answer to his own question, and found, to his surprise, that he didn't even want to know. What he did want to know, however, as he quickly scooped up his towel and began to search for his clothes to change, was how quickly the show would end so he could get to Jericho's hotel room and pay him back in kind for that simply phenomenal welcome in the WWE. The end. Thank you for listening to episode number 45 of Wrestlerotica. We hope that you enjoyed this week's stories. As always, if you enjoyed this week's stories, please be sure to like and review us on iTunes, as this helps increase our value on the charts. Visit us elsewhere online, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and as always, our official website, WrestleRoticaPod.com. Thank you and have a good week.